The Holy Gospel according to John, the 11th chapter. Now a certain man was ill, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. Mary was the one who anointed the Lord with perfume, wiped his feet with her hair. Her brother Lazarus was ill. So the sisters sent a message to Jesus, "Lord, he whom you love is ill." But when Jesus heard it, he said, "This illness does not lead to death. Rather, it is for God's glory, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it." Accordingly, though Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus, after having heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. Then after this, he said to the disciples, "Let us go to Judea again." The disciples said to him, "Rabbi, the Jews were just now trying to stone you, and you're going there again?" Jesus answered, "Are there not 12 hours of daylight? Those who walk during the day do not stumble, because they see the light of this world. But those who walk at night stumble, because the light is not in them." After saying this, he told them, "Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I am going there to awaken him." The disciples said to him, "Lord, if he has fallen asleep, he'll be all right." Jesus, however, had been speaking about his death, but they thought he was referring merely to sleep. Then Jesus said to them plainly, "Lazarus is dead. For your sake I'm glad I was not there, so that you may believe, but let us go to him." Thomas, who was called Twins, said to his fellow disciples, "Let us also go, that we may die with him." When Jesus arrived, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb 4 days. Now Bethany was near Jerusalem, some 2 miles away, and many of the Jews had come out to Martha and Mary to console them about their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went and met him, while Mary stayed at home. Martha said to Jesus, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now I know that God will give you whatever you ask him." Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." Martha said to him, "I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day." Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, even though they die, will live. And everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this?" She said to him, "Yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, the one coming into the world." When she had said this, she went back, called her sister Mary, told her privately, "The teacher's here is calling for you." And when she heard it, she got up quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet come into the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. The Jews who were with her in the house consoling her saw Mary get up quickly and go out. They followed her because they thought that she was going to the tomb to weep there. When Mary came where Jesus was and saw him, she knelt at his feet and said to him, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who came with her also weeping, he was greatly disturbed in spirit, deeply moved. He said, "Where have you laid him?" They said to him, "Lord, come and see." Jesus began to weep. So the Jews said, "See how he loved him." But some of them said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying?" Then Jesus, again greatly disturbed, came to the tomb. It was a cave. There was a stone lying against it. Jesus said, "Take away the stone." Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to him, "Lord, already there is a stench, because he has been dead 4 days." Jesus said to her, "Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone. Jesus looked upward and said, "Father, I thank you for having heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I have said this for the sake of the crowd standing here, so that they may believe that you sent me." When he had said this, he cried with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out!" The dead man came out, his hands and feet bound with strips of cloth, his face wrapped in a cloth. Jesus said to them, "Unbind him and let him go." Many of the Jews, therefore, who had come with Mary and had seen what Jesus did, believed in him. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Christ.
Our text today comes from the exact middle of John's Gospel. It is the turning point, the moment where Jesus' movement will be towards Jerusalem and the cross that awaits him. His disciples know that he's in danger here. Twice before, when he's been near Jerusalem, back in chapters 9 and 10, the temple authorities have threatened to stone Jesus for his teachings, believing them to be blasphemous toward God. This is what is behind the disciples' concern when he talks about going to Judea, and Thomas's words to the other disciples, "Come, let us go, that we may die with him." It also explains why Jesus meets with Martha away from their house, where many of the Jewish authorities have gathered to support her and her sister Mary in their grief, and why Martha goes back and tells Mary in private that Jesus wants to see her. They're all trying to avoid another confrontation between Jesus and the authorities, those who believe he is a fraud at best and a blasphemer at worst. So while there is danger lurking, only Jesus and us, as hearers of this word centuries later, can see the messages hidden in the text, the foreshadowing of what is to come in just a few weeks. People weeping, mourning for their beloved friend, a tomb with a stone lying against it. The word used for the cry of Jesus when he calls for Lazarus to come out is the same word that is used to describe the hosannas of the crowd as Jesus triumphantly enters Jerusalem on Palm Sunday, and the shouts of the crowd just a few days later to crucify him. There's also the mention at the beginning of the reading of Mary being the one who anoints and wipes Jesus' feet with her hair, an action that has not happened yet. This story contains much meaning for us as we look ahead to the journey of Holy Week, as we see and feel so much resonance between the two. But I want to look back for a moment, to look back over the last few weeks as we have talked about the witness of the Samaritan woman at the well and the man born blind. In both of these, we have met models for our own life of faith, people who were considered by the religious beliefs of the day to be sinners, those who were not of the religious mainstream. In their encounter with Jesus, he called them out of their old selves. For the Samaritan woman, shunned by her neighbors, the encounter with Jesus called her out of her isolation to dare to share the story of her encounter with Jesus. She was given such courage as to invite those around her to come and see this Jesus for themselves. The man born blind was called out of that blindness by Jesus, given the ability to see clearly how things were. This was not always an easy thing, but even in the midst of persecution, he was given the courage to bear witness to his own story. To say to those around him, "Here is what I know about Jesus. I once was blind, now I see. I've been fundamentally changed by this man, changed for the better." The disciples themselves at this moment, at least Thomas, are willing to walk with Jesus into a situation that could mean death. They trust him enough to follow him into the shadow of danger. Jesus had called forth something in them too. We also look forward today, beyond Holy Week, to the ending we already know, the empty tomb, where we don't get to see the resurrection happen. We know that the one who calls Lazarus to come out will very soon be escaping the tomb himself, called forth by God's power. We see Jesus, the embodiment of God's love for the world, reflect that love as he weeps for Lazarus, the one whom he loved as a brother. We also see a precursor to Jesus' encounter with Mary Magdalene at the tomb in his conversation with Martha. Interesting, isn't it, that the women are the first to understand who Jesus is, to see the proof of his identity in the resurrection. Martha is the first in the Gospel of John to proclaim her faith in Jesus. Yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, the one coming into the world. The author of John at the end of the Gospel says that this is the reason this Gospel was written, that you may come to believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that through believing you may have life in his name. It is from Martha that the purpose of this gospel is fulfilled. In Lazarus, whose name means God has helped, we see what Jesus means for our own lives. In Jesus, God helps us, calls us out of the death that is a life in sin. It doesn't matter how long we've been in bondage to sin and death, how much our lives stink. Jesus Christ, the Son of God, calls us. Irene, come out. Sarah, come out. Rob, come out. We are called by name to come out of the dark cave of sin and death and to come into the light. Unbind him. Let him go. Note that Jesus does not unbind Lazarus himself, but it's the community gathered around Jesus who is called out to help the newly risen to be freed from all that binds him. The animation, the resurrection is Jesus, but as the body of Christ, the community gathered around him, we have a role to play. We are called out to help people as the addictions, habits, thoughts, grief, sin that holds them bound are unwound, truly releasing them. We are the ones called to walk with them as Stephen ministers, to listen to them as we work side by side. We pray with them in their grief. We visit them in the hospital. We sit with them in their anger and confusion. And note, here is another way that we are called to witness. For those who came out with Mary saw what Jesus did and believed. As we invite people to come, as they are connected to our lives and supporting us even in our times of need, they come into the presence of Jesus. They see what only Jesus can do, lives transformed, people freed from fear of death, resurrection in all its forms, and this encounter leads to belief, leads them to confess that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God sent into the world so that all who believe in him might have life fuller and more abundant. Starting next week, next Sunday, we will walk with Jesus step by step to the cross. But today is a moment to look back at the journey we have taken, to look forward past the cross, and to see and believe again for ourselves. And to hear Jesus' resurrection call to us. Come out.